For example, laws limiting our ability to withdraw or even carry large sums of cash and laws authorizing civil asset forfeiture were justified by the need to crack down on drug dealers and users. The war on drugs is also the root cause of the criminal justice system's disparate treatment of minorities and the militarization of local police. The war on drugs is a war on the Constitution as well. It's a war on the Torah. It's a war on everything. Okay? The Constitution does not give the federal government authority to regulate, much less ban drugs. People who doubt this should ask themselves why it was necessary to amend the Constitution to allow the federal government to criminalize drinking alcohol, but not necessary to amend the Constitution to criminalize drug use. Today, a majority of states have legalized medical marijuana, and a growing number are legalizing recreational marijuana use. Enforcement of federal laws outlawing marijuana in those states is a type of federal interference with state laws that conservatives usually oppose. Hopefully in this area, the Trump administration will exercise restraint and respect state marijuana laws. He doesn't have respect for anything if it's not according to his vision. Sessions' announcement was not the only pro-drug war announcement made by the administration this week. President Trump himself, in a meeting with the president of Colombia, promised, interesting, Colombia, okay, that's of course what the District of Columbia is named after, and that's one of the biggest dope pushing places in the world, but Colombia is also a goddess of war and a goddess of death. Continuing on, promised to continue U.S. intervention in South and Central America to eliminate drug cartels. President Trump, like his attorney general, seems to not understand that the rise of foreign drug cartels, like the rise of domestic drug gangs, is a consequence of U.S. drug policy. This is a direct result of it. The use of government force to stop adults from putting certain substances into their bodies, whether marijuana, saturated fats, or raw milk, violates the non-aggression principle that is the bedrock of a free society. Therefore, all those who care about protecting individual liberty and limiting government power should support ending the drug war. Those with moral objections to drug use should realize that education and persuasion carried out through voluntary institutions like churches and schools is a more moral and effective way to discourage drug use than relying on government force. All right. But of course, when force is your modus operandi, well, then we can understand why the actions are taken. And this has been the case since the inception of America. And since the West has made its presence known in the world, force has been its modus operandi. Okay? And this is because that is their nature. Their nature is violent because their environment from which they come is violent. And that is why it correlates the way it does. Now, going a step further, we're looking this from the perspective of the dominant Western society, and that, of course, is the United States. But we understand the root. I wanted to go to the root first, from Christendom to Europe, okay? We just dealt with this drug administration, or this administration in its war on drugs, its revamped war on drugs. And now we're going to deal with what's called the deep state. This is from counterpunch.com by Ron Jacobs. It was written, yesterday. When you access this article, please give me a 4, an acknowledgement of your receipt of the article. It is called The Deep State is the State. So we've been hearing this phrase from Trump and other individuals. They're calling this the deep state. Okay, this is like the hidden government, the shadow government. Well, it is the state. Let's not be naive and politically understanding how this really all operates. So I'll rabbi for your acknowledgement of this matter here. It says the deep state is not some enigmatic entity that operates outside the U.S. government. It is the U.S. state itself. That is what the deep state is. It is the United States government in league with all of her legions and the cabal that she's a part of, going back truly to the Vatican. Like all elements of that state, the so-called deep state exists to enforce the economic supremacy of U.S. capitalism. It does so primarily via the secret domestic and international police forces like the FBI, CIA, and other alphabet intelligence agencies. The operations of these agencies run the gamut from surveillance to propaganda to covert and overt military actions. Naturally, this so-called deep state operates according to their own rules, rules which ultimately ensure its continued existence and relevance. Although it can be argued that it was the 1950 National Security Directive known as NSC 68, along with the congressional bill creating the Central Intelligence Agency that launched the deep state, as we understand it, a broader understanding of the deep state places its genesis perhaps a century prior to that date. So while many may focus in on this 1950 bill shortly after World War II, and Operation Paperclip, which brought many of the Nazis to the United States, and they came up with the Central Intelligence Agency with the SS, okay? Well, it may even precede that. They're saying that this article is saying that this deep state may even go back to 1850, all right? And that's when the Vatican infiltrated. They may not get into that this article, but that's when the Vatican infiltrated and moved the White House, or the capital of the United States, from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. Okay, continuing. In other words, a structure designed to maintain the economic and political domination of certain powerful U.S. capitalists existed well back into the 19th century. However, the centralization of that power began in earnest in the years following World War II. For those who don't know what the National Security Committee 68 actually was, it is essentially a directive that militarized the conflict between U.S. capitalism and Soviet communism. It was based on the correct understanding that U.S. capitalism required open access to the resources and markets of the entire planet, just like a parasite sucking the blood from the veins of its host, and that the Soviet Union represented the greatest threat to that access. Not only did this mean the U.S. military would grow in size, as a parasite does when it leeches, it also ensured that the power of the intelligence sector would expand both in terms of its reach and its budget. When one recalls that this period in U.S. history was also a period when the FBI and the U.S. Congress were going after leftists and progressives in the name of a certain right-wing ideological purity, the power of the U.S. secret police becomes quite apparent. As the 1950s turned into the 60s, the so-called deep state's power continued to grow. Some of its better-known manifestations include the failed attempt to invade revolutionary Cuba that became known as the Bay of Pigs, the use of psychoactive drugs on unsuspecting individuals as a part of mind control study, and numerous attempts to subvert governments considered anti-American. Among the latter actions, one can include covert operations against the Vietnamese independence forces and the murder of Congolese President Patrice Lumumba. In terms of the deep state's domestic operations, this period saw the intensification of spying on and disrupting various groups involved in the civil rights and anti-war organizing. Many elements of the domestic operation would become known, as we are very aware here in this room, as COINTELPRO, and were directed by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. Although the agency of the so-called deep state operate as part of the U.S. state, this does not mean that those agencies are of one mind. Very interesting. Indeed, like any power structure, there are various factions represented. This means that there are disagreements over policies, priorities, direction, and personnel. The only certainty is that all of its members agree on the need to maintain the supremacy of U.S. capital in the world. At times, the seemingly absolute power of the CIA and FBI have caused the U.S. executive branch to try and set up other means and methods in order to circumvent that power. Two examples of this that come quickly to mind are the establishment of the Defense Intelligence Agency by the Kennedy administration in 1961 and 62, and the failed attempt known as the Houston Plan after its creator Tom Houston by the Nixon White House to centralize the direction of all U.S. government intelligence operations in the White House. There is no soft coup taking place in D.C. The entire government has been owned by big business and the banking industry for more than a century, if not since its inception. What is that called? When government is owned by big business and the banking industry, somebody type in the text box, what is that called? What do you call that? When government is owned by business. Yeah, I'll give you that. But it precedes America, though. There have been other examples of this in history. What do they call that? When corporations and banks own government, what do you call that? Nah, it's a part of capitalism. You call that fascism. That's a fascist government. Okay? You're dealing with corporatocracy, which is fascism. You can call it an oligarchy. But ultimately, it points to fascism. That is what this is about. So that ownership has been dominated by the military-industrial complex since about the same time when the aforementioned agencies were created. That is no coincidence. However, their role in the current uproar over Russia and Michael Flynn is not because they are taking over the government. It is because their current leadership represents the factions of the U.S. establishment that were removed from power in November of 2016. Donald Trump is not against the so-called deep state. Let's be clear about that. He is against it being used against himself and his cohorts. That's what he's about. We got to stop this stuff that's coming against my pockets. In the world of capitalist power, the factions of Trump are not the same factions represented by the president, former FBI Director Comey served, the factions represented by Bush and Obama. He understands that if he can install individuals in key positions at the FBI, CIA, DHS, and other security and military agencies, he and his allies will be more than happy to use the power of these agencies against their opponents. Indeed, he would most likely greatly enhance those agencies' powers, making a further mockery of the U.S. Constitution. If Trump is able to get the agencies of the deep state to work for the factions he represents, either by replacing those loyal to others not named Trump, or by cajoling and coercing them to change their loyalty, he will think the deep state is a great thing. In this way, he is no different than every other U.S. president. He understands that whoever controls the deep state controls the U.S. The struggle we are witnessing between the FBI and the Trump White House is part of a power struggle between U.S. power elites. When the ruling class is in crisis, as it is now, the job of the left is not to choose one side or the other, nor is it to accept the narrative provided by one or the other factions of the rulers, especially when that narrative supports the police state. Instead, it is the left's job to go to the root of the crisis and organize resistance to the ruling class itself. Know your enemy, know yourself. Understand what's going on. There's crisis, but the reality of the matter is this: never let a crisis pass without seizing an opportunity that the crisis is created. And this is what we have to understand. We have to understand these matters as relates to what Israel needs to be doing at this specific time in space. Okay? Because there is change taking place, but this change is very interesting. Okay? It will also create a white lash. It will create a white lash. This article comes to us from Hampton Institute. It is by Daryl Barth. It is called No More Confederate Nostalgia in NOLA. That's, of course, New Orleans, Louisiana. They've removed all of the Confederate statues that were present in New Orleans. That's big, but still, it remains. But when you access this article, please give me a 4 in acknowledgement of your receipt of No More Confederate Nostalgia in NOLA. Very interesting, right, Bot? So, for the last few days, armed men in New Orleans have been protesting the removal of monuments to a failed white supremacist republic. Has it really failed? The workers tasked with carrying out the removal of Confederate monuments in New Orleans are working in flak jackets and with masks to obscure the identities, since threats of violence have surrounded the plan to dismantle statues of Confederate President Jefferson Davis and Generals Robert E. Lee and Pierre Beauregard. Many of the protesters at these monuments are not from New Orleans, but have traveled from elsewhere in the South in order to express their disapproval of the City Council of New Orleans' decision to remove monuments to men who raised armies against their own country in order to defend slavery. That's very plain. It would be easy to attribute this latest episode of white racial outrage to the rising tide of populism surrounding the descent of Donald Trump to the presidency. Yet the monument to the Battle of Liberty Place in particular have been the cause of controversy in 1989, 1993, and 2004. White supremacy and racism wrapped in a veil of heritage is not new for Louisiana. It would be even easier to connect the liberal insistence on removing these monuments to the Charleston Church Massacre. In June of 2015, Dylan Devils Hoof Roof murdered 9 African Americans at a prayer meeting at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church because he believed black people rape white women and are taking over our country. Our country, he says. Roof wrapped himself in symbols of white nationalism for pictures he posted of himself online before he went on his rampage, and so, of course, liberals concluded that these symbols were problematic, and to be fair, these symbols are problematic. However, what is more problematic is that the United States has existed as a white nationalist republic for much longer than it has existed as a nominally representative democracy where all citizens enjoy equal protection under the law. Still does not exist. It still does not exist. The American South, and especially the Confederate States, lost a war that they fought in order to preserve slavery, which will preserve their economy, okay? The same war that the northern states won as a war to preserve the Union for the economy of industry. They didn't want an agricultural society or industry. They wanted an industrial industry. They wanted a revolution where it would not be based in agriculture. They wanted big business, okay? So that purpose was not to abolish slavery in the South. After the Civil War, there was a mad rush to reconciliation that resulted in the reinstitution of white rule in the southern states through a regime of racial terror. The Battle of Liberty Place was one episode of racial terror and violence inflicted by New Orleans by white supremacist terrorists and was fought between the Metropolitan Police Force and the White League, a white supremacist paramilitary organization comprised mostly of Confederate veterans that served as a street army for white conservative politicians in New Orleans. Now, look at this plaque on one of the statues. United States troops took over the state government and reinstated the usurpers, but the national election, November 1876, recognized white supremacy in the South and gave us our state. This is on one of the the doggone statues. So it's blatantly written in stone to show their perspective and their goals and their agendas. So the monument to the Battle of Liberty Place is the monument to Louisiana's redemption and the reinstitution of the old antebellum caste order following the period of Reconstruction, when people of color in the South enjoyed the briefest semblance of the rights of citizenship guaranteed by the Constitution. Redemption of the South for white rule meant the dispossession and disenfranchisement of non-white people. It also entailed a rearticulation of slavery through the criminalization of black life, and we know that as slavery by another name. And there's a series, a documentary that talks about that. And it talks about convict lease programs and things of that nature. So you get the black codes from and things of that nature. Indeed, the legacy of the political program persists today in the form of a mass incarceration state that has extended the life of that peculiar institution of American slavery well into the 21st century. And Louisiana in particular stands out as the state with the highest rate of incarceration in the country, that incarcerates more people than any other in history. To be certain, that is the history and the heritage that is currently being reified and dignified through the demonstrations of armed men flying the Confederate battle flag in New Orleans tonight. They hide their threats behind a fig leaf of free speech, but the very history they are celebrating is a history of treason and lawlessness. They are a modern-day white league replete with token people of color, like the lawyers in Florida who are standing up for this man, this judge who needs to be disbarred. Okay, but this is desperate for white approval. This is what all it is. This is the boule. These are the informants to the king. All right, when you're dealing with these token people of color, just capitulating to the will and the ideals of white supremacy, it's because they're boule. They're getting a little benefit, but at the end of the day, they still niggas in their eyes. Let's be really clear, and we know that. But this is all hinting at a willingness to resort to violence should anyone, even the elected government of the city of New Orleans, dare to abandon the trappings of a failed rebellion perpetrated by their ancestors, men who were wicked and ignoble, who betrayed their country and fought and killed and died to preserve their right to buy, sell, rape, and murder black people. Just like this prosecuting attorney in Hollywood, Florida, that was just found dead on a beach yesterday. All right. So we're seeing this. We saw the female judge in New York that was murdered. And then there was another judge, I believe in Illinois, that was murdered. And now you have this prosecutor in Florida who was just recently murdered. So we're seeing these things just recur over and over and over. Nothing new. It's unfortunate as it is, but these are the signs that we need to see to do what we need to do. Okay? So Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Pierre Bogard were all men willing to throw in their lot with the slave regime and do not deserve to be commemorated for that decision. To pretend as if these men deserve to be lauded for leading men into the jaws of oblivion in defense of an evil regime ruled by men where position was thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery is absurd, and it is long past the time that the people of New Orleans recognize the absurdity of it and put an end to it. None of these men deserve to be elevated on a pedestal, and the question of celebrating the history of the Civil War is moot. The South remembers the heroes of the Civil War every 4th of July when they celebrate the birth of the Union. Mayor Mitch Landrieu will face waves of criticism for his decision to remove these monuments. Those criticisms don't matter, though, and Landrieu should not waste time arguing with the detractors in this matter. The fact that the men tasked with dismantling these memorials must hide their identities and conduct their work wearing Kevlar vests is a testament to the character of the people who oppose Landrieu's efforts in this. Those people deserve no reasoned consideration at all. Mitch Landrieu, the first white mayor of New Orleans since the Civil Rights era, came to an end. The last white mayor was his father, was the person who had to get this done, and he did. So, when you think of what America has done, memorializing these murderers, these devils, then, it just stands as a testament to what America really stands for. Because what America stands for is just outright brutality from its inception. Okay? That last paragraph is just speaking about the mayor making the decision to do this. And he's a white man, and he's getting a lot of backlash or white lash for his choice to actually go about dismantling these. No, the one score, please. The score. Let me do that. I'm gonna come back to that article. It's all right, sister. We'll come back to that. But I kind of want to keep it moving because this is something here that really captures. It may capture it. Okay, let's see what this. Because this is something that I feel. If you all have been like on social media and you've seen some of these outblashes and these just tirades that are going off from these people. This is from Afro Punk. It's called White Rage. Despite the angry black stereotype, most race-based street harassment comes from angry white folks. You've seen the guy down at the beach, I believe in Mexico, going off on some individuals. And then you see the woman at Walmart going off on people. And then you see the man at the airport who's going off on people. So, this is the real source of it. All right. So, they open with a quote from something. I think it's Aaron's actual quote herself. But she says, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. Some of the truest words, and there are many on the black experience uttered by James Baldwin. So it is a quote by James Baldwin. And yet in spite of this rage, what we really don't see is black people taking that anger out on whites or other people who are minding their own business. An important distinction coexisting in this lovely world. Personally, Aaron White says she spends a good bit of her time oscillating between incredulity, anger, and delirium. Exhausted from the ways in which white people assert their entitlement in any number of ways while making my way through a white world. But even with the persistent anger looming behind the forced smiles and over politeness aimed at presenting myself as an agreeable, non-aggressive black. Still, despite the righteous anger I feel, not once in my life have I felt even slightly compelled to attack a white stranger for daring to leave the house in their whiteness. More than inappropriate and misdirected, doing so seems pretty cruel. But hey, that's just Aaron writing. And we know that this alt-right individual at Bowie State who took the life of this young man in college also recently, is another incident of this white rage. Similar to the one, the stabbing, very interesting, that took place in New York, where that old man was killed by someone from Virginia who just drove down with the intent on murdering, someone just because of the color of their skin. But Aaron White says this: white people don't seem to have a problem with this. White folks seem to pretty much have a lock on harassing others in public spaces because they are different than them, often red-faced, finger-jetted outwardly towards another. And of course, these instances have only increased since Donald Trump was elected. There are countless videos, in fact, of stale white people belligerently screaming, chasing some poor POC or an immigrant, person of color that is, or an immigrant, multicultural, multilingual person down a grocery store aisle, down the bench, or down the beach, or down the street. And surely Trump's win symbolized the legitimization of white racism and white fear of becoming racial minorities that have enabled the boldness of their confrontations. But my question is, why do white people seem so eager to behave in such ugly ways? And again, go back and read the book, Iceman Inheritance. It will completely lay it out for you. I guarantee you that. It's one thing to have these evil thoughts and to keep them to yourself, but it's kind of unfathomable that one would become totally unhinged by hearing a passerby speaking Spanish. Just because you speak Spanish, you're going to flip for real? This man, this handicapped person here, went off on someone because they spoke in Spanish to his mother, and he lost it. So at the risk of being too generous, I'm starting to think it's possible that white Americans sometimes experience a type of psychosis that enables and encourages them to behave in profoundly inappropriate and deranged ways. A psychosis that starts, or that is triggered, by the reminders of how they historically have treated marginalized racial groups, and when the horrors of that reality and the fact that America's non-white population will grow to become the majority intersect, white people lose their ever-loving minds. I don't have a cure for white folks on this one. It's true that one day they will in fact become racial minorities in America, as they already are in the world. And this is something that they've done so well through technology to make it seem as if they're the majority in the world. But in fact, they are the minority. The melanin deficient individuals on Earth are the minority. But they've strategically positioned themselves in places of power in order to appear as if they are the majority. But that is not the reality, especially in the southern hemisphere. The northern hemisphere, there may be some, equal numbers, but when you go to the southern hemisphere, it completely outweighs the number. And I'm not speaking in terms of race. I'm speaking in terms of science. I'm speaking in terms of what's the word I'm looking for? Phenotypes. Okay? And physiology. This is what this is about. So, but just because they treated us badly doesn't mean we'll have to treat them badly in this hypothetical future. However, carrying on like this now of all times, it ain't gonna help. And if we can keep it, so can y'all. All right. So just very interesting article there. But this just goes to show here. This next article, also from Afropunk, it's really going to show how this system works. Okay. And I don't know if anyone has saw some of the footage from the testimony that Betty Shelby gave, who was a murderer, the murderous cop out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, who killed Terrence Crutcher. Okay. And how she ran out of the courtroom after she was actually found not guilty. But she's back on the job already. And that's what this article says. Killer cop Betty Shelby is already back on the job. When you access that, give me a 4. And this was printed up on the 22nd of May. So this was just recently. So when Tulsa, Oklahoma cop Betty Shelby was acquitted of first-degree manslaughter last Wednesday in the death of Terrence Crutcher, that was bad enough. To make matters worse, and if you looked at her interview, she was so unstable. But she's back on the beat? To make matters worse, a juror later revealed that the group voted not guilty in the case because they were getting hungry and tired. Look at that. As if justice for a man's life wasn't hanging in the balance. So, we were getting tired and hungry, so we just voted her not guilty. You see what I'm saying? And we're knowing that this drug war is about to escalate. Can you see what is taking place? Know your enemy, know yourself. Understand what's going on. Understand. That's very powerful that they did have them tornadoes there. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The Most High, he's not making them innocent and declaring them innocent. He knows the blood guilt. And he sees it. And he will respond. So now to pour even more salt on the wound, Shelby is already back on the job, proving once that the killing of an unarmed black person is so routine that not only is no punishment required, but neither is any time for self-reflection on the part of the cop who pulls the trigger. She'll be right back in the same situation soon. This is by Ahari Zayad. As we reported last week, Shelby has a history of using excessive force against citizens and claimed that watching Crutcher walk away from her and the other assisting officers made her fear for my life. He's walking away from her, but she's fearing for her life. And this was all Crutcher's fault that he died because she did everything she could do to stop this, she says. Of course, the video of Crutcher with his hands up and fully complying told a different story, but in America, anti-blackness is the only story that matters. As the Griot notes, Shelby was on paid leave during her first trial and is among several other officers who were permitted to return to work immediately after being accused of excessive force. The officers involved in the 2015 death of Freddie Gray have returned to work, as well as Daniel Pantaleo, the NYPD officer who held Eric Gardner in a fatal chokehold in 2014. Another one was just put in a fatal chokehold in Las Vegas about 2 weeks ago. But Pantaleo didn't just get his job back, he got paid 6 figures in overtime while working modified desk duty. Perhaps the question now is one posed by Joy James and Yao Costa Vargas in their paper Refusing Blackness as Victimization, Trayvon Martin, and it goes on something there that I have been meditating upon recently. What happens when instead of becoming enraged and shocked every time that a black person is killed in the United States, we recognize black death as a predictable and constitutive aspect of this democracy? What will happen then if instead of demanding justice, we recognize or at least consider that the very notion of justice produces and requires black exclusion and death as normative? All right. This is just more signs for us to realize what we need to do, where we need to be. Because this is becoming very recurrent and very problematic and troubling. Okay? But this is going to be an article that I'm going to present next that is just as troubling. This article here is very concerning to me. It's a brief article, but it speaks volumes. This comes to us from the African American Intellectual Historical Society website. The name of the article is entitled Colorism as Racism, Garvey, Du Bois, and the Other Color Line. This is by Ibram X. Kendi. Okay, he wrote this on May 24th on the African American Intellectual Historical Society. When you access this article, Bavakasha, give me a 4. I hope what I'm presenting so far is kind of capturing what my offering is called. Know your enemy, know yourself. Okay, this is what we're wanting to do. We're seeing both sides of the spectrum now. Okay, we're understanding the principle and the spirit of our enemy, but now we're going to look at those tokens who are also a part of this hegemony in maintaining this social status quo of white supremacy. So, Kendi says 100 years ago this month, Marcus Mosiah Garvey and 13 associates gathered in a Harlem basement to found the New York branch of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. When the stocky, dark-skinned Garvey arrived in the United States in 1916, he had no plans to stay. Hallelujah. He intended to raise funds for a school in Jamaica modeled after Booker T. Washington's world-renowned Tuskegee Institute. With Washington dead, Garvey sought out W.E.B. Du Bois at the New York office of the NAACP. Du Bois was absent, and Garvey said he was unable to tell whether he was in a white office or that of the NAACP. The plethora of white and light-skinned people on the NAACP staff and all the light-skinned black people in desirable positions in black America no doubt contributed to Garvey's decision to remain in Harlem and establish his UNIA chapter there in 1917. Now, if you all are familiar with the huge schism that existed between Du Bois and Garvey, it was huge. And it was all because of his complexion, Garvey's. Du Bois was very contemptuous of Garvey because of his Back to Africa movement. Even though Du Bois died in Ghana, right? He later saw what it was really about, but he was racist. He was a discriminator, hater, if you will, because of Garvey's complexion. This Negro, this monkey, this gorilla, he would call him, can't lead our people. Very much so. And not to mention Du Bois was of mixed ancestry, okay? But scholars were also taking note of these light-skinned people. 2 years after Garvey's jarring visit to the NAACP's headquarters, sociologist and eugenicist, okay, there's a devil here, Edward Byron Reuter finished the mulatto in the United States. From his base at the University of Iowa, Reuter made a name for himself, arguing that anything black people achieved was in fact the achievement of biracial, light-skinned people. He situated biracial, light-skinned people as a sort of racial middle class, below superior whites, above inferior full blacks. So you can see where they're now enforcing this sort of colorism, right? Crazy as it may be. And of course, we know that the AKA sorority group at one time had a paper bag test. Whereas if a sister was darker than the paper bag, she couldn't be admitted into the sorority. So these are things that, and we still do this today. We are still very conscious of the color of our complexion today. For us who are more enlightened and for us who are more rooted in culture and consciousness, it's not an issue. But for those who think that light skin is better and, you know, the curlier hair and the better hair, all that stuff, and nappy hair is bad, I mean, these are the stains of our dehumanization that has just continued to this very day. And so these are things, the enemies within we got to be aware of, very much so. Jigaboos and wannabes, right? Very much so. Bada Zion. I mean, that movie captured it perfectly. You know, the jigaboos versus the wannabes. And it's like, we're the same people. Let's make that clear. But let me go back to this article. I digress. So Reuter was the latest in a long line of racist ideologues of colorism in the United States, an ideological line that begins with towering Princeton theologian Samuel Stanhope Smith. In 1787, before members of the American Philosophical Society, some of whom would go on to write the U.S. Constitution that year, Smith praised domestic servants for having advanced far before the darker and Africanized field slaves through acquiring the agreeable and regular features of civilized society: light complexion, straight hair, thin lips. Colorism, like all forms of racism, rationalizes color inequities with racist ideas by claiming the inequities between dark and light-skinned people are not due to discrimination against dark-skinned people, but the inferiorities of dark-skinned people. And we, in this room, have gone over the power of melanin and how the darker your skin is, the more power and the more connected to the universe and to Yah you are, because of that key chemical component and element that is within you. But they've demonized it. And that's what the devil does. They demonize the things that are righteous. Okay? Racist ideas are not all the same because black people are not all the same. There are many types of racist ideas demeaning the different types of black people, including black women and black men, light-skinned and dark-skinned people. A light skin is beautiful because of the striking resemblance to beautiful white people is a different type of racist idea than a dark skin is ugly because the striking dissemblance from beautiful white people. And you can see the Magnolia skin bleaching cream that's taken over in Africa and Jamaica and places like that, it's just a shame and extremely sad that this stuff still takes place. And I'm not going to finish this article here because we're very well aware of these issues that are present within our people. We need to be on guard against them. We need to learn to combat them. This is something politically as well that we have to address. We have to address this. Now, know yourself. We just talked about know your enemy. This last half of my offering is now going to deal with knowing yourself. So when you access this next article from Libya360.wordpress.com entitled The Little Known Africa, The Little Known Africa, please give me a 4. One thing politically that we have to do as people of African ancestry is change the narrative and the perspective of Africa. Israel's Northeast Africa. And that's something we need to understand. That's changing the narrative. It's the Middle East. No, it's on the northern border of Egypt. It's Africa. Let's be clear about that. All right. It's on the African tectonic plate. All right. So, although the mainstream media focuses daily on negative news stories in Africa, there is another reality to the continent which today, May 25th, is celebrating its day. So, African Liberation Day is taking place just this past week, May 25th. That's the day that we recognize Malcolm, and all his contributions to our liberation as a people. His born day was the 19th of May, but May 25th is recognized as International African Liberation Day. All right. This is by Darcy Borrero Batista. So you see several African countries have recently established free or compulsory primary education. Although the mainstream media focuses daily on negative news stories in Africa, there is another reality to the continent which today, May 25, is celebrating its day, confident of its decisive role in international affairs. Today, Africa cannot be ignored or underestimated. 54 years have passed since the founding of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, giving rise to Africa Day. Much has changed in the continent, which has since then consolidated itself as a strategic bloc. The OAU, today the African Union, has brought together the 55 nations of the region, including Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic and the youngest country of the world, South Sudan, under its principles of respect for the sovereignty and independence of each state. After a long period of a voluntary absence, Morocco returned to the organization during the last AU summit in February. Thus, the third largest continent in the world, with 20.4% of the world's total land, is experiencing an unprecedented moment of cohesion. And I wouldn't even say that's the third largest continent in the world. I'm pretty convinced personally that it's the first in the world, for real. Asia's pretty big because it has, a little more space, but it's not as big as Africa, to my understanding. I may be wrong, but I may be biased as well. So this is committed now to the defense and the exploitation of its natural resources for the benefit of its people. According to the UN Concise Report on the World Population Situation 2014, the world's highest population growth rate will be concentrated in Africa. By 2050, Africa will be growing more than 6 times as fast as Latin America and the Caribbean, and more than 15 times as fast as Asia, the report reads. Powerful. Know yourself. This is a part of your people. All right? We got Israelites all throughout this continent. And they're African. And they're dark. They're melanated. They got some light skins too, though. But the point is, we need to understand and reconnect with our mass of land. Until that land is respected and free, we as a people will never have respect nor freedom. And Israel has a huge role to play in that undertaking. The growing position of Africa as a strategic area is linked, in addition to its natural and mining wealth, to the fact that by 2050 it will see more than 80% of the world population increase, while Asia will represent just 12%. Listen to these facts and these findings and these statistics. In addition, between 1994 and 2014, this was the continent where there was the largest absolute change in under 5 mortality, with a decline from 168 to 101 deaths per 1,000 live births. Huge growth. In Cuba, where there is a notable African heritage, proactive foreign policy toward this region has been followed since the triumph of the revolution. This island is proud to belong to the African diaspora, which the AU refers to as the continent's 6th region. You have North, South, East, West, Central, and then the diaspora is the 6th region. All right? And we have to understand how to connect with that 6th region, because I'm guaranteeing you, African peoples need each other now more than ever. All right? Commandant en Jefe Fidel Castro took the decision early on to send both civilian and military aid, as well as Cuban soldiers, to support the national liberation movements of several countries, including Angola, Ethiopia, and Congo, in fulfillment of our sacred internationalist duty. Since then, Cuba has reiterated its readiness to strengthen the relations of solidarity and cooperation with African nations, as demonstrated by the thousands of Cuban collaborators that today contribute to the socio-economic development of the continent. Cuba's solidarity with Africa not only stems from a sense of duty, but from the African blood that was shed in the island's pro-independence movements since the 19th century, as well as the cultural legacy of Africans in Cuba. In this sense, the authorities of the island have reiterated their support for the implementation of the African Union's Agenda 2063, rooted in Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance. And we are pro-African and Pan-African in this room as well. And we support the African Renaissance, with Israel playing a major role in that matter as well. The good news is in Africa, although rarely reported in the mainstream media, includes many advances. Listen to this. Several African countries have recently established free and compulsory primary education. Life expectancy over the past 20 years in the region has increased by 6.5 years, and the least developed countries made significant progress with an 8.9-year life expectancy increase in the same period, according to the UN report. Sub-Saharan Africa has 3 countries, Rwanda, Namibia, and South Africa, which rank among the top 20 countries in the world with the lowest gender gap in health, education, economic opportunities, and political representation, according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2015. In 2011, it was revealed that Ghana, with strong political stability, rising social and health indices, and oil, was the second fastest growing economy in the world after Qatar. Other notable examples is Seychelles, a small island developing state whose current president, Danny Faure, studied in Cuba. In the period from independence to 76 to 03, the country made remarkable social and economic progress. The economy grew consistently, and all social and economic indicators demonstrated regular advances. As a result, by 2003, Seychelles differed from the majority of countries benefiting from UNDP Development Program of the United Nations support. Read the 2009 Assessment of Development Results Evaluation of UNDP Contribution on the country. It would appear that this reality is not of interest to mainstream media outlets. One could argue that hegemonic powers prefer to obscure African progress. This would be not surprising, marking just another in a long line of steps taken against the continent, which saw so many of its people forced into slavery to benefit world powers, while the burden of underdevelopment befell their own nations, robbed of their natural riches. However, today offers us an opportunity to congratulate Africa on its day and to commit ourselves to its reconstruction. We need to be engaged in this, people. One way, one shape, one form, one fashion. However, we need to get engaged in the reconstruction of Africa. And this does include the land of Israel and its reconstruction as well, in righteousness. This next article comes to us from Face to Face Africa. It is by Frederick Ngugi. He wrote this yesterday. It is entitled, "Continued Looting of Africa's Wealth Has Left Africans Poor." It's not because they're poor, naturally. Africa is the richest continent on earth. When you access this article, give me a 4. It is the looting. It is the raping of the continent and the stripping of resources from material to human that has left Africa poor. It is beyond anyone's comprehension why Africa continues to be classified as the poorest continent on earth, yet it has a massive pool of some of the most expensive natural resources. Without a doubt, the vast majority of Africans live on less than $1 a day and lack even the most basic needs such as food, shelter, and healthcare. This apparent deprivation has left Africa and its people at the mercy of international donors and well-wishers, most of whom end up benefiting more from Africa than the poor Africans. So could it be that this apparent looting is the reason why Africa continues to be poor? Undeniably. This is the question that several campaign groups seek to answer in a special report released on Wednesday. According to the report, much more wealth is leaving the world's most impoverished continent than is entering it. It further claims that African countries are collectively net creditors to the rest of the world, to the tune of $41.3 billion. They're creditors, not borrowers. The world owes Africa over $41.3 billion. African countries received $161.6 billion in 2015, mainly in loans, personal remittances, and aid in the form of grants. Yet $203 billion was taken from Africa either directly, mainly through corporations repatriating profits and illegally moving money out of the continent, or by costs imposed by the rest of the world through climate change, the report indicates. What's worse is the fact that multinational companies working in Africa have found ways to steal 3 times the amount that African countries receive every year in the form of grants by deliberately misreporting the value of their imports and exports in order to enjoy more tax exemptions. Which begs the question, how much are Africans required to pay for external loans? The report indicates that African governments collectively borrowed $32.8 billion in loans from external lenders in 2015, but paid $18 billion in debt interest and principal payments. Many African countries are now trapped in the vicious cycle from the IMF, the International Monetary Fraud, of borrowing, as they have to borrow more money to repay previous debts. A good case in point is Zimbabwe, which has been forced to borrow hundreds of millions of dollars to pay back its arrears to the World Bank so that it can be eligible for further borrowing. Foreign countries, especially the most developed ones, are also stealing from Africa through illegal logging, fishing, and trade in wildlife products. At the moment, civil rights groups and environmentalists in Cameroon are engaged in court battles as they seek to stop massive destruction of the previous Cameroon rainforest by a U.S.-based palm oil company. Furthermore, Africa has to deal with unfair trade policies, most of which allow unprocessed agricultural goods to be exported from African countries and refined elsewhere, causing the vast majority of their value to be earned abroad. Figures show that the rest of the world is profiting from the continent's wealth, as they've always done since colonialism, since the Arabs invaded the continent. Okay? More so than most African citizens, yet rich country governments simply tell their public that their aid programs are helping Africa. This is a distraction and misleading, according to the report. The way forward for Africa to develop. Foreign governments must genuinely allow African countries to benefit from foreign investments by enabling them to legally regulate such investments and the corporations involved. How about we do that? We can't rely on foreign governments to do this. They're not going to be honest. They're not in the interest of Africa. They're in their own interest. We need to take control of our own and be self-determined. But it is also important, Ngugi says, for foreign governments to address the issue of tax havens in Africa and ensure investors from their countries fully complying with the existing tax regulations when doing business on the continent. If we're expecting other people in other nations to take care of our business in the right way for us, well, then we're putting our lives in other people's hands. If we're not taking control of our own and making sure that we are in control of our destiny, then everything will fall as it has failed. And it will be to our detriment. So, looking at some other matters as relates to Africa, because knowing ourselves, the reason I've chosen to really focus on Africa is because this is our pulse. This is our source. And I mean that as far as, politically and geographically. If we're not focused on Africa and its liberation and its self-determined realities, then we're not focused on anything. We have to focus on our homeland. Okay? Just like Europe, we just examined Europe and what they're doing. They're linking up. What are we doing? We're dividing up. You see what I'm saying? And so now we need to find ways to link up. When you access this article from newafrican.com, it's the magazine, New African magazine, the magazine is called New African. This was written on the 23rd by David Meff. It's called A New Approach to Ending Africa's Wars. When you access this article, Akasha, give me a 4. All right. Hallelujah. He starts with a quote. Despite considerable progress, parts of Africa are still mired in violent civil wars that are costing millions of lives and destroying national economies. The UN record of intervention, or lack of intervention in some cases, has been one of failure. All right. In this composite cover story, David Meff argues that only a different approach to maintaining peace can bring an end to this African tragedy. In the big interview linked to this story, retired Canadian Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire, force commander of the Rwandan mission, spells out what this new approach is all about. Now, this isn't from an African perspective, though, but we need to take consideration of what is taking place. I'm going to post it again for you. A quote. There you go. The 20th century showcased both the best and worst of humanity, from exponential advances in science and technology to the horrors of mechanized warfare and cruelty on a scale hitherto unknown to the world. The UN was meant to act as a medium, and we know what the deal is with that, through which to balance these achievements and challenges, channeling dialogue and orchestrating a concert of nations. The results prove infinitely more complex. Decolonization, the Cold War, and the dissolution of the old world political structures laid the groundwork for a general globe malaise that materialized into several avoidable human catastrophes, during which the UN acted as little more than accountants of slaughter. No part of the world experienced this more cruelly than Africa. Early failures of international arbitrators and peacekeepers in Katanga and Biafra, and we know Biafrans are Israelites, left a stain on the UN emblem, while later conflicts in Angola, Sierra Leone, and Somalia exposed their impotence. Now, Namdi, I forgot his last name, he is actually, I believe, free now. He's home. The leader of Biafra movement, who was political prisoner in Biafra, is actually at his home now. He's been released. Hallelujah. The 1994 Rwandan genocide provided a startling reminder of the gross inefficiencies of international diplomatic bureaucracy and the manner in which board policy can dehumanize the individual and lay waste to even the best intentions. It reminded the world that the true enemy of humanity is not evil, but rather the indifference of good leaders and a lack of empathy translated into direct action. Know your enemy. Know yourself. It is apathy many times, right? It is the lack of not having clear, defined missions, okay? And action that follows that. The age of peacekeeper is over, or perhaps never was. What we need now are peace builders. Listen to this. We need peace builders committed to staying until the job is done, however long it takes. This is where the kingdom builders come in. Kingdom builders, we're peace builders. That's what we're about. That's why the weapons that we have are not carnal. We don't build weapons of mass destruction. Our weapons are mighty in the spirit for overthrowing reasoning, strongholds, and every vain matter that exalts itself against the knowledge of Elohim, taking captive every thought and subjecting it into Mashiach, ready to punish all disobedience when our obedience is made complete. This is what we are about in this room. Okay? There are currently 9 ongoing UN missions on the African continent. Western Sahara, Mali, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Abyei, and Darfur. Concurrently, the world now faces the very real threat of several separate famines across the globe, 4 of which could take place in Africa. While this new century appears different in gadgetry, it showcases many of the hallmark troubles of the old world. We see again the rise of violent nationalism, state-sanctioned xenophobia, religious intolerance, trade and physical barriers, and humanity's ever-present indifference towards its neighbors. The weapons of war may have changed, but not its ultimate goals. What needs to change is our approach to these challenges, or we doom ourselves to repeating the mistakes of the past. New approaches. Africa remains at a crossroads of sorts, with one foot stuck in the old world and the other plunging desperately into the unknown. The Heidelberg Institute's 2016 Conflict Barometer identifies 14 highly violent civil conflicts currently underway in sub-Saharan Africa alone. Now, what we have to ask ourselves is why. These are colonial residue wars, okay? It's the residue of the colonial presence in South Sudan, in the sub-Saharan Africa, okay? Because what they've done is stoked up animosities and tension amongst the people in order to go about extracting the materials and resources. This is what you call neo-colonialism, all right? But they're rooted in colonialism. So instead of them fighting the natives, well, let's just get the natives to fight each other. And while they're fighting, we'll just go ahead and extract everything that we need. That's what neo-colonialism does. And this is why it's important to know your enemy and to know yourself. All right? Know these strategies and these tactics and these machinations that they use in order to go about securing their power. So if left unchecked, these 14 highly violent civil conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa could quickly spiral into decades-long conflicts or more blatant expressions of ethnic cleansing or outright genocide. New approaches to peace from the international community must incorporate multidisciplinary forms of conflict resolution that go past soldiers, involving NGOs. These NGOs in Africa are very strategically placed, these non-governmental organizations, lawyers and economic investors, to spark lasting growth. These sectors already work independently with varying degrees of success, and an organization like the UN could be best suited to harmonize their efforts, yet they cannot achieve these goals alone. Now, I'm not going to read any more of this article, but you can see what is taking place. Again, the reliance on external forces to resolve internal issues is never effective. Again, the reliance of external forces to resolve internal issues is never effective. We have to understand the need to be engaged in this transformation ourselves. That's where transformation comes from, within. And this is what we have to understand. So, moving on to our next article. When you access this article here, please give me a 4. This is from Black Agenda Report. This is by Mark P. Fancher. It is called In the Light of African Liberation Day, Imperialist Rats Will Run Away. In the light of African Liberation Day, imperialist rats will run away. When you access this article, Bavakashah, give me a 4. He has a quote. The late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was in the crosshairs of the imperialist gun sights. So just go down. Don't worry about the little brief paragraphs there. Just go down. But he is going to be dealing with AFRICOM because this is what this comes down to. So on or near May 25th, there will be commemorations of African Liberation Day around the world. Although this has become an annual ritual, for many African Liberation Day participants, the 21st century has brought considerable confusion about the nature of conflict between those who want genuine African independence and self-determination and those who want to continue domination and exploitation on the continent. As Africa's wars for independence raged during the 70s, there was little doubt about the nature of the conflict and where the action could be found. The front lines of battles against colonizers were in Angola, Zimbabwe, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Namibia, and other regions where liberation organizations with enough letters in their combined acronyms to make alphabet soup mobilized squadrons of guerrilla fighters to carry out hit-and-run missions that ultimately harassed settler regimes, Western armed forces, and their proxies out of Africa. They took matters into their own hands, people. This is what I'm talking about. We cannot rely on external forces to go about resolving our issues. Now, this is what's so deep, too. I'm going to bring this up from, it's called A Great and Mighty Walk. It's a documentary with John Henry Clark about him. He talked about World War II and how there were African people who wanted to, in America, and I mean African as far as their descent, they wanted to go to Ethiopia to fight for Ethiopia against the Italians. But guess what happened? They denied that. But when you had these Europeans want to go to their country and fight for their country during World War II, free access, they had complete access to it. So again, we got to see how this all works out, how this pans out. And again, if we're relying on someone to tell us what we can and can't do, well, we're not truly self-determined. Okay, so this is just how this all works out. Continuing on. While the stubborn refusal of imperialists to loosen their neo-colonial grip on Africa has meant the struggle for liberation must continue, 1970-style direct armed conflicts in the African bush between revolutionaries and Western troops are rare. The imperialists now take their shots at freedom fighters from behind closed doors at the U.S. State Department, the Pentagon, or NATO headquarters in Brussels. On the ground, implementation of strategies is conducted by proxies who are sometimes twice removed from the architects of the plans. Africa's freedom fighters may be unable to crash through the closed doors of imperialist strategy rooms and confront the plotters directly, but thanks to the U.S. Freedom of Information Act, it is at least possible to know what they have talked about. Know your enemy, know yourself. Media attention devoted to Hillary Clinton's emails has rarely focused on the thought processes of the former Secretary of State and her associates with regard to Africa. But these exchanges provide fascinating and instructive insight into a collective, callous, arrogant mindset. In 2011, the late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was in the crosshairs of the imperialist gun sights. On April 2nd, 2011, email to Clinton explains frankly and bluntly why he was targeted. Quote, Libya's 143 tons of gold was accumulated prior to the current rebellion and was intended to be used to establish a pan-African currency based on the Libyan golden dinar. This plan was designed to provide the Francophone African countries with an alternative to the French franc. The email goes on to explain, quote, French intelligence officers discovered this plan for a Pan-African currency shortly after the current rebellion began. And this was one of the factors that influenced President Nicolas Sarkozy's decision to commit France to the attack on Libya. End quote. The explanation doesn't stop there. Quote, according to these individuals, Sarkozy's plans are driven by the following issues. A desire to gain a greater share of Libya oil production. It's not about removing a tyrant. B, increase French influence in North Africa. Colonialism. C, improve his internal political situation in France. And D, provide the French military with an opportunity to reassert its position in the world. And E, address the concern of his advisors over Gaddafi's long-term plans to supplant France as the dominant power in Francophone Africa. All of that is cynical. That is all cynicism at its finest. African countries were expected to get on board the train to Libyan regime change without resisting or even questioning the reasons for the journey. It is therefore not surprising that the U.S. State Department became not only frustrated, but irritated with the African countries that hinted at a willingness to stray from the customary script neo-colonies are expected to follow. An internal memo forwarded to Clinton dated March 22, 2011 states, quote, "There is a definite split on the African continent, with more nations lining up behind the March 20th African Union statement and questioning our military mission, or at least seeking greater clarity than those who are fully articulating support." End quote. Another memo in the same email chain from Johnny Carson, former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, relates his conversation with the African Union official Ramtane Lamamra, who affirmed the African Union's reluctance to rely on armed force in Libya. Lamamra, quote, Lamamra noted that the AU is particularly focused on the need to intensify efforts to resolve the crisis and respond to the legitimate demands of the Libyan people, and notes that the joint AU and UN role in facilitating dialogue that leads to political reforms necessary for a peaceful, sustainable solution, end quote. Carson reported that Lamamra denied any suggestions that the African Union was making special efforts to preserve the Gaddafi government, and that what the organization wanted instead was a democratic process that would allow the Libyan people to freely and fairly choose their own leaders. Notwithstanding the objective reasonableness of that position, it was clearly in conflict with the U.S. position that Gaddafi must go, Carson said. Quote, "I told Lamamra the absence of any AU condemnation of Gaddafi was screamingly notable. Africans knew the imperialist destabilization of Libya would have devastating consequences for the continent. By contrast, the State Department's hacks, bureaucrats, and high-ranking officials are on a mission to manipulate and exploit at whatever cost, and they act with indifference to the pain and turmoil of the people who suffer the consequences of imperialist schemes and operations. Consider the arrogance and cynicism of a February 27, 2011 State Department memo that presumes regime change is inevitable and offers suggestions how to handle the aftermath. With respect to the Italian role, it says, quote, should be kept relatively low profile by virtue of Italy's colonization of Libya and enduring sensitivities stemming from that. Will be tough to balance Italy's desire to protect its sizable commercial interests against the need to play a quiet, less visible role, end quote. And he goes into parentheses saying, ironically, the author of the memo was not a personal acquaintance of Clinton's, and in questioning whether he was still on the State Department's roll, she commented, quote, I was surprised that he used personal email account if he is at state, end quote. Bob Marley said, quote, hypocrites and parasites will come up and take a bite, but if their night should turn to day, a lot of people will run away, end quote. If Africa's enemies have retreated like cowardly rats to the safety of their offices and boardrooms where they not only hide behind U.S. Africa Command or AFRICOM, but also the various terrorist forces and African armies Western governments enlist as military proxies, then it's time for us to drag their deliberations and plans out into the light of day, African Liberation Day, so that Africans can see them and learn how to fight the continent's enemies more effectively. Know your enemies, know yourself. All right? These are imperative articles that we're reading in our role as Israelites to bring back this great continent known as Africa, of which we are the pineal gland. We are the lightning rod. We are the spiritual leaders of this continent. Speaking of leaders, we have to remember our leaders. And this again comes to us from ALD. This is the same article here. Yep, that's the same article. I'm sorry. Don't worry about that. All right, this is my second to last article here. Know your enemy. Know yourself. So ignore that article from Libya 360. It's the same exact article that we just read. This one comes to us from New Euromed DK. It is entitled Pope Francis, whose church has appointed Satan its head, obsessively warns against Satan while worshiping Christ as the son of Lucifer from hell. End quote. So now we're going to go up against this fourth beast and read about this priesthood that we're truly up against. All right. Anders, who posted this, quotes 2 John chapter 1 verse 7 through 11. He says, "For many deceivers are entered into the world, who confess not that Messiah Yahushua is come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an anti-Messiah." And we know that there are many now who are renouncing and rejecting Yahushua, who at one time embraced him. So this spirit is just spreading of the anti-Mashiach even into Israel now. All right? Look to yourselves. Know yourself. Look to yourselves, that we lose not those things which we have wrought, which we have worked, which we have brought forth, but that we receive a full reward. Because that's what our works, our reward is going to come from, our works. "Whosoever transgress and abides not in the teaching of the Messiah has not Elohim." People are talking about, I reject the doctrine of the New Testament now. This is what people are saying out of their mouth. I reject the doctrine of the New Testament, of the Messiah. I reject it. All right? You don't have the Father. He that abides in the doctrine of the Messiah, he has both the Father and the Son. "If there come any unto you, and bring not this teaching, this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him Yah-speed. For he that biddeth him Yah-speed is a partaker of his evil deeds." End quote. Pope Francis has a bizarre relationship with the devil. On one side, in the Vatican and in his deeds, he worships the devil and acts as his disciple. On the other side, he warns against the devil to Catholics. The Vatican has elected Pope Francis to destroy the church from within. As I have written, the Catholic Church in the night of 28 and 29 June 1963, during the satanic Second Vatican Council, which was steered by converted Jewish Pharisees, celebrated a black mass with Albert Pike's Southern Division of the Scottish Rite Masons in Charleston, South Carolina, tuned in. In this mass, the blonde German delegate was the ceremonial master who enthroned Satan as the head of the Catholic Church. This was testified by Jesuit Pater Malachi Martin. He then died of mysterious circumstances. You can watch the video there that talks about the Second Vatican Council. But he goes on to say, "I have often written how Satan has taken over the churches of the world to build his evil one world church as a prerequisite for his technocracy, Agenda 21, United Nations, one world state. And I have described how the late Israeli President Shimon Peres of the King Lodge of all Masonry appointed Francis to be head of this satanic Christ excluding UN Church, the United Religions Initiative organization, to include all religions, only possible by excluding Mashiach Yahushua. Francis is now the head of this Messiah excluding one world religion. On September 4, 2014, Perez asked Francis to head his visionary United Religions Initiative. Father Lombardi reveals that this proposal followed the syncretic June prayer meeting. He says, "The Pope stressed to me that the meeting was the opening of a door to encouraging further initiatives to develop and go forward." This is a portal that they opened spiritually to summon these demonic entities and forces into their circles. The order of the Jesuits is not what it outwardly looks like. It's an occult satanic order and a master of deception using Hegelian dialectics. Yahushua had a reason to warn us about the end time. In Matthew 24, verse 4, "Take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Messiah, and shall deceive many." You can see the former black pope and Jesuit superior general until 1991, Pedro El Rupe, making the 666 hand sign of the anti-Messiah. The Bibliothecapleides describes the Jesuit power to be that of the Illuminati, Below Francis and the cardinal show the hand sign of the devil horns, which is the Illuminati sign. This is a logical consequence of the papal interfaith movement, and here stated by John Paul II in 1986 and continued by Benedict XVI and Pope Francis I. All right, Pope Francis is a Jesuit, and we've covered that, who has sworn a terrible oath to kill all non-Catholics, and whose coat of arms is full of pagan, satanic symbols and not one messianic symbol. The Jesuits were founded by Talmudic crypto-Jews and want to rule the world using Masonry, which is just Phariseeism, Judaism for non-Jews. So this is how the non-Jews get accepted into the world of Judaism, through these occult organizations. An imam has prayed to Allah for victory over the infidels before the Pope during a peace prayer at the Vatican. A speaker from Radio Vatican has confirmed similar reports. The New Catholic Catechism, Article 841, teaches that Jesus Christ is superfluous for man's salvation through Abraham's blessing to Muhammad and the Arabs' ancestor Ishmael. It's a blatant lie. In Genesis 17, verses 17 through 21, the Most High explicitly declines Abraham's plea to let Ishmael inherit that blessing. Allah is no one but the devil, of whom Pope Francis warns so obsessively. Pope Francis pleads for unlimited Muslims immigration into Europe, calls the Muslims his brethren, washes their feet, and claims that Islam is no more aggressive than Christ's baptism commandment. He even says Islamic terror is no sin, but breathing producing CO2 is. Okay? And according to the Quran, Allah is the best of deceivers, it says. Okay, he even washes and kisses the feet of Muslim immigrants, taking 12 of them with him to the Vatican. 12. Very, very blatant in the symbology, if you can see that. Okay, you can see here his obsession with the devil and his God, against whom he time and time again warns against hypocritically. So, CNN 20 of July 2015. His tweets and homilies about the devil, Satan, the accuser, the evil one, the father of lies, the serpent, ancient serpent, the tempter, the seducer, the great dragon, the enemy, and just plain demon are now legion. For Francis, the devil is not a myth, but a real person. And we know that the devil is in the flesh, all right? Many modern people may greet the Pope's insistence on the devil with a dismissive cultural affectation, indifference, or at most indolent curiosity. Yet Francis refers to the devil continually. He does not believe him to be a myth, but a real person, the most insidious enemy of the church. In the Vatican's 2012 and 2013 Easter Masses, the Satanic Mass was celebrated, and Francis and everyone present said amen. And they openly called on Lucifer. And that they say, I say, O Lucifer, who will never be defeated, Christ is your son. This is what they say there. That's the translation of that. Francis' seeming preoccupation with the devil is not a theological or eschatological question as much as a call to arms. It is a political cry he's calling out. An invitation to immediate action, offering very concrete steps to do combat with the devil and the reign of evil in the world today. Now, what is his name? His name, it was, oh my goodness. I want to say Peter Brokaw. I don't think that's his name. He was a very famous commentator, but he not recently, it was probably in the 90s, and we played it in here. How he said, join with me with the devil to go about bringing forth this new world order. There it is, Cronkite. It was Walter Cronkite. Exactly. He's the one that said that. You know, and so this is just what it's all coming out in the open now. Okay. And he said that after he retired, but he actually had, been of that ideology for some time. But when he retired from being a broadcaster, a journalist, is when he came out in the open and said that. Okay. But in his homilies, Francis warns people to avoid discouragement, to seize hope, to move on with courage, and not to fall prey to negativity or cynicism. He is drawing on the fundamental insight of St. Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Society of Jesus, the Pope's own religious family. With his continual references to the devil, Pope Francis parts ways with the current preaching in the church, which is far too silent about the devil and his insidious ways, or reduces him to a mere metaphor. During the first months of Francis's pontificate in 2013, the evil one appeared frequently in his messages. In his first major address to the cardinals who elected him, the Argentine pontiff reminded them, "Let us never yield to pessimism, to that bitterness that the devil offers us every day." In several daily homilies in the chapel of the Vatican guest house, the Pope shared devilish stories with the small congregations, wrapped in attention as he homilized on taboo topics. He has offered guidelines on how to rout the demon strategy. First, it is Jesus who battles the devil. The second is that we cannot obtain the victory of Jesus over evil and the devil by halves. For as Christ said in the Gospel of Matthew, "Who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters." The Pope has stressed that we must not be naive. The demon is shrewd. He is never cast out forever. This will only happen on the last day. Francis has also issued calls to arms in his homilies. Quote, "The devil also exists in the 21st century, and we need to learn from the gospel how to battle against him," end quote. According to the devil's shrewdness, Francis once preached, quote, "The devil is intelligent. He knows more theology than all the theologians together," end quote. Before a crowd of people on Palm Sunday in 2013, the newly elected Pope even dared to say that when Christians face trials, Jesus is near, but so is the enemy, the devil, who comes often disguised as an angel and slyly speaks his word to us, end quote. Most recently, on July 12, the Pope presented the job description of the devil. Quote, "Friends, the devil is a con artist. He knows that well. He makes promises after promise, but he never delivers. He'll never really do anything he says. He doesn't make good on his promises. He makes you want things which he can't give. He makes you put your hopes in things which will never make you happy," end quote. That's not the end quote. Since the beginning of his papacy, that is the end quote. Francis has been warning that whoever wants to follow Jesus must be aware of the reality of the devil. The life of every Christian is a constant battle against evil, just as Jesus during his life had to struggle against the devil and his many temptations. For Francis, the spirit of evil ultimately does not want our holiness. He does not want our Christian witness. He does not want us to be the disciples of the Messiah. In all these references to the devil and his many disguises, Pope Francis wishes to call everyone back to reality. The devil is so frequently active in our lives and in the church, drawing us into negativity, cynicism, despair, meanness of spirit, sadness, and nostalgia. We must react to the devil, Francis says, as the Messiah did, who replied with the word of the Most High. With the prince of this world, one cannot dialogue. Dialogue is necessary among us. It is necessary for peace. It is an attitude that we must have among ourselves in order to hear each other, to understand each other. Dialogue is born from charity, from love. But with the dark prince, one cannot dialogue. One can only respond with the word of Elohim that defends us. The devil has made a comeback in this pontificate and is playing an important role in Francis's ministry. Francis is dead serious about the devil, and he takes every opportunity he can to tell the devil to get the hell out of our lives and our world. Very interesting article, which leads me to my last article, which is from HebrewVisionNews.wordpress.com. It is an exclusive article written by Mikhail Corbin-Yahu, aka the End Time Scribe. I'm leaving it with you here. The name of the article is entitled Guardians of the Shekinah, Parashat Bamidbar Reflections. When you access this article, Bavakashah, give me a 4. I want to thank you all for tarrying and sojourning with Hebrew Vision for this time, as we have been in here for almost 5 hours now, 6 pretty much. You've heard the Parashat for this week, you've heard the Haftarah, you've heard clarity on Shavuot, and now we're wrapping up Know Your Enemy, Know Yourself. And I pray that everything you've heard so far has been stimulating, has been edifying, has been enlightening, has been encouraging, has been just empowering to you so that you can move forward in what it is that you're wanting to do in serving Yah for your capacity, your role. Each and every one of us has a role in serving Yah. And I pray that this is helping you to find what your capacity is in doing so. We open with a quote from the Jewish Encyclopedia article, Administration and Service of the Temple. It says, a strict watch over the temple was maintained, the guard being composed of 3 priests and 21 Levites. The priests were stationed, one at the chamber of the flame, Bet Ha-Nizos, one at the chamber of the hearth, Bet Ha-Moched, and one at the chamber of the attic of Abtinas. The Levites kept guard as follows: 1 at each of the 5 gates of the mount entrances, 1 at each of the 4 corners within the mount enclosure, 1 at each of the 5 important gates of the courts, 1 at each of the 4 corners within the court, 1 at the chamber of sacrifice, 1 at the chamber of curtains, and 1 behind the Kaporet, the Holy of Holies. The captain of the guard saw that every man was alert, chastising a priest if found asleep at his post, and sometimes even punishing him by burning his shirt upon him as a warning to others. Then we read from Numbers 153, but the Levites shall pitch their tents round about the tabernacle, lest there come indignation. We read about indignation, righteous anger today, upon the multitude of the children of Israel. And they shall keep watch and guard the tabernacle of the testimony. In the event of an individual being a key witness in the matter of a legal proceeding, it is not unusual to ensure the safety of said person by placing them in protective custody. Protective custody is legally defined as an arrangement whereby a person is safeguarded by law enforcement authorities in a location other than the person's home because his or her safety is seriously threatened. This course of action, often taken by law enforcement officials, is similar to that of which the Levitical priesthood did with the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron HaBerit, and other furnishings within the secured quarters of the tabernacle and later the temple precinct. Being that the ark was the most prized vessel in the Israelite nation, there were precautionary measures set in place in order to protect this most sacred furnishing, which was the portal through which the Shekinah of Yah was made manifest on earth. Ultimately, it was this witness that the Levites were intent on protecting, as well as the witness of the people, which the Levites went about guarding to prevent the wrath of heaven from breaking out within the encampment of Israel due to trespassers or defilement being present within the camp. Therefore, the Levites' custodial protection of the tabernacle and temple was a measure to not only ensure the sanctity of the temple, but also that of the people. In this capacity, it was this responsibility of the Levites as guardians that allowed for the entire nation of Israel to experience ultimate reality. And that is only experienced in Yah. That is where ultimate reality is made known. The responsibility of the Levites included securing both the outside and inside premises of the holy grounds, of which they vigilantly guarded. Specific duties were prescribed to family lines within the Levitical tribe, with Aharon ben Amram being instituted as the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and Moshe ben Amram, his brother, designated as the royal representative of Yah before the people. What remained was a distinction between the Kohanim and the Levites, by which the entire duties and functions of the priesthood were delineated. As such, 3 divisions were made to keep watch of the sacred grounds of the tabernacle and temple according to the following. The Gershonites. The duty of the children of Gershon in the tent of meeting was the dwelling place, and the tent with its covering, and the covering of the door of the tent of meeting, and the screens of the courtyard, and the covering of the door of the courtyard, which is around the dwelling place and the altar, and their cords, according to all its service. You can read that in Numbers 3:25 and 26. The Kehathites, their duty was the ark, and the table, and the menorah, and the altars, and the utensils of the set-apart place used in the service, and the covering, and all its service. And Eleazar, son of Aharon the priest, was to be chief over the leaders of the Levites, with oversight of those who guard the duty of the set-apart place. Numbers 3:31 and 32. And lastly, the Machlites. From Merari came the clan of the Machlites and the clan of the Mushiites. The appointed duty of the children of Merari was the boards of the dwelling place, and its bars, and its columns, and its sockets, and its utensils, and all its services, and the columns of the courtyard all around, with their sockets and their pegs and their cords. Numbers 3:33a through then also verses 36 and 37. These Levitical duties allowed for the Kohanim to go about carrying out the specific rituals of the tabernacle and temple, with the Levites serving as the laborers and custodians of those buildings. It is interesting to note that it was because of their faithfulness to Yah during the incident of the golden calf that the Levites were chosen to be the guardians of the tabernacle. Their selection was in the stead of the firstborn of every family, who were originally chosen to serve as the priests and administrators of the sacred rituals that the nation was to serve. Now, if I may interject real quick, my understanding is this. This is what Michael understands. Prior to the Levitical priesthood order, well, let me ask this question. What order of priesthood was in place? Prior to the establishment of the Levitical priesthood, what was the order of priesthood that was in existence? Can someone type that in? What they would understand to be the order of priesthood that existed prior to the Levites. Boom. Melchizedek. This is the order of the priestly king. Melchizedek. That's exactly what was in place. And it took the firstborn from every household and installed them into the place of priest. Very crucial. I wanted to just point that out. Toda Rabbah for your responses, Achain and Moreh. Excuse me. It wasn't the father. He was the head of the family, yes, but the firstborn became the priest of the family. Okay? The prince of the family and the priest of the family are two different things. Okay? Very important to note that. So going back to Numbers, we read this. Then Yah said to Moshe, saying, See, I have taken the Levites from among Bnei Israel in place of the firstborn who opened the womb among Bnei Israel. The Levites will be mine, because all the firstborn are mine. In the day when I was striking down all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim or Egypt, I consecrated to myself every firstborn in Israel, whether man or animal, as mine. I am Yah. This Numbers 3:11 through 13. Given this solemn responsibility that the Levites were given to guard the tabernacle and temple grounds from unauthorized individuals entering its quarters, there were great measures taken to secure the premises from such persons. In fact, so serious was the duty that if one of the Levites were to be found asleep during their watch, the captain of the watch, who would find that person asleep, would often burn their shirt to both awaken and shame them for their negligence. Of this measure taken, we find this matter explained by Josh McDowell in his book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, informing us that, quote, Alfred Edersheim gives us this description of the tight discipline under which the temple police worked. During the night, the captain of the temple made his rounds. On his approach, the guards had to rise and salute him in a particular manner. Any guard found asleep when on duty was beaten, or his garments were set on fire. A punishment, as we know, actually awarded. The Mishnah shows the treatment given. Yep, there you go. The treatment given anyone found asleep during the watch is, quote, the officer of the Temple Mount used to go around to every watch with lighted torches before him. And if any watch did not stand up and say to him, O officer of the Temple Mount, peace be to thee, and it was manifested he was asleep, he would beat him with his staff, and he had the right to burn his raiment. And they would say, what is the noise in the temple court? The noise of some Levite that is being beaten and having his raiment burnt because he went to sleep during his watch. This is why knowing yourself, knowing your enemy, and knowing yourself is so important, because these priests, we'll get to that, they played an important watch of this precinct, all right? And we'll get to that all tied in at the end of this article. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, they once found my mother's brother asleep and burned his raiment. The Jewish Encyclopedia comments concerning the sacred premises with the temple, those who were on watch therein were not allowed to sit down, much less to sleep. The captain of the guard saw that every man was alert, chastising a priest if found asleep at his post, and sometimes even punishing him by burning his shirt upon him as a warning to others, end quote. We find this principle later applied to the entire household of faith for the purpose of remaining vigilant and not falling asleep during the latter days. Many times in the Messianic codicil writings, we find exhortations given to the body of Mashiach to remain alert and awake so as to not allow sleep to fall on our eyes during this dark hour in which we find ourselves. As witnesses to the reality of the Word made flesh, it is our duty to remain ever observant of the Torah's principles, which then causes us to become a most set-apart vessel for the Most High as faithful witnesses who bear the testimony of Yahushua. Of this principle, Rav Shaul of Tarsus encourages the Nazarene assembly in Thessalonica with these words, quote, "Now concerning the times and seasons, brothers and sisters, you have no need for anything to be written to you. For you yourselves know very well that the day of Yah comes like a thief in the night." Hold on to that one. When they are saying shalom and safety, sudden destruction comes upon them like a woman having birth pains in the womb. There is no way they will escape. But you, brothers and sisters, are not in the dark, so that the day might overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night or of darkness. So then, let us not sleep as the others do, but let us remain on the alert and sober-minded. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober-minded, putting on the breastplate of faithfulness and love and the hope of salvation as a helmet. For Elohim did not destine us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Rabbi Yahushua the Messiah. He died for us so that whether we may be awake or asleep, we may live together with him. Therefore encourage one another and build each other up, just as you are doing. In fact, are doing. This 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 11. The phrase, a thief in the night, is a Hebraic idiom that refers to the watchman in the tabernacle and temple. In fact, an article from Sweet Manna called A Thief in the Night, as Jewish idiom and Remez statement tells us, quote, "To be caught asleep by the temple captain was known as the captain coming as a thief in the night." Once again, we see the idiom as a reference to being caught unaware or unasleep. If you understand what was just said in this article, please type in a 1. This is so important because when Yahushua is talking about a thief in the night, he's referencing the watch that took place in the tabernacle and in the temple and the importance of remaining vigilant so that we may not be taken unaware. This is crucial. As guardians of the Shekinah, the lesson that we are to take away from the priesthood's role with both the tabernacle and the temple is that we are not to allow outsiders or unwelcome beings into our most sacred dwellings. This includes spiritual entities. While we are often on guard against physical invasions, the spiritual invasions tend to slip by our defenses since they are more subtle in nature. Compounding this reality is the fact that over the years, we've grown more tolerant to the practice of sin and have not remained vigilant in our contest against it. So as a result of the widespread acceptance of sin, instead of our detesting even the thought of it, it has many times become part of our nature when, contrarily, we were created to be perfect reflections of the mindset and characteristics of our Heavenly Father. Speaking to this matter, while just hours away from his execution, Rabbi Mashiach Yahushua ben Yosef shares these most crucial words with his closest taught ones. Quote, "My soul is deeply grieved, even to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell down and prayed, saying, "Abba, Avinu, Abi, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he comes to the disciples and finds them sleeping. And he tells Peter, "So you couldn't keep watch with me for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying so that you won't enter into temptation." There's the answer to everything. Remain watchful and prayerful so that you won't enter into temptation. Keep your mind on Yah. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for a second time, he went away and prayed, Abi, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, let your will be done. And again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them again and prayed a third time, saying the same words once more. Then he comes to the disciples and says to them, still sleeping, taking your rest. Look, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being delivered into the hands of sinners. Get up, let's go. Look, my betrayer is near. The principle of watching in Hebrew, called shamar, is associated with the idea of maintaining, cherishing, observing, storing, preserving, retaining, protecting, guarding, watching, celebrating. It is a thing kept. It is to strain or filter, to keep the golden nuggets, to sort out the precious from the common. Literally, it is the diligent flow of intelligence when wisdom fills the mind. At its peak, it is the complete protection of what is released. The observance of Torah in Hebrew is called Shomrei HaTorah, which suggests one's careful and attentive keeping of the instructions of Yah. With the observance and the guarding of Torah, we are then able to prevent any foreign invasion from spiritual and physical adversaries. Therefore, we must not only be on guard against our physical enemies, but also against the spiritual enemies which are identified as the works of flesh, which Rav Shaul identifies as follows. Now the deeds of the flesh are clear: sexual immorality, impurity, indecency, idolatry, witchcraft, hostility, strife, jealousy, rage, selfish ambition, dissension, factions, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these. I am warning you, just as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit Elohim's kingdom. Galatians 5:19 through 21. Often we are taken unawares by these invaders due to our relaxed state of mind, which allows for these enemies of our nature to enter small or large fissures and take up residence within our temples. For the sake of our salvation, however, it is crucial for each member of Mashiach's body to maintain a vigilant watch over the affairs of our personal life, as well as those who are in our circle of influence. It is undeniable that group accountability and individual responsibility are crucial matters that play essential roles in maintaining both the sanctity and well-being of the nation. For it is this disciplined action that will allow for the Shekinah of Yah to indwell our temples individually and collectively for the manifestation of the kingdom of heaven on earth. For the witness that we protect is the Spirit of Yah, which allows for the body of Mashiach to bring forth the testimony of Yahushua, which is the spirit of prophecy. Therefore, it is our duty as a kingdom of priests to remain ever watchful of the grounds of our bodies as temples that we've been given to ensure its safety and sanctity. For our Master will soon return and reward us according to our vigilance or negligence, as it is written, "Behold, I am coming like a thief." How fortunate is the one who stays alert and keeps his clothes on, lest he walk around naked and they see his shamefulness. Revelation 16:15, Selah. And that is the last article within my offering, Know Your Enemy, Know Yourself. It is my prayer that what has been presented to you all on this Sabbath day has truly been enlightening and in the spirit of the Parshat that we have read, as I've strived to now pretty much just line up everything with the Torah reading. I want to make this more tangible for us and concrete, make this more concrete for us to really understand how this portion that we're reading for the week relates to our here and now. You know, we can look at it in ancient times, but we need to see ourselves in the reading and see our situations and our circumstances and the historical and current events that surround us present in the past, so that the future is as Yah has called it to be. And that's what we more than anything need to understand is that it's finished. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. He established it right there. So now we're encountering the future because Yah has it already finished. This is how prophecy works. It works because it is already finished. It is already completed for Yah. But creation is catching up to that time, which is ahead of us. But it's already been mapped out because Yah has called the end from the beginning. And that's the beauty of serving the Creator and following and keeping His will and His Torah, His instructions, because it's already prepared. And the more vigilant we are, the more observant we are, the more watchful we are of Torah, well, the simpler our life becomes. So I want to thank each and every one of you all again for choosing to fellowship with us here in Hebrew Vision, where Yah is the Most High and Yahushua is Mashiach. I do believe that we still have one more presenter, Moreh Shebaniah. If you are presenting, I see your hand now up. If you all have any questions, please hold your questions until after Moreh is complete. You can then ask questions ensuing his offering that he's presenting, and we'll go forward from there. But we do welcome you all to the microphone when the time is available for you all to have open mic. Please come to the microphone, share any thought, any question you may have, any prayer request, any praise report, any revelation that you received that may have clicked for you. Like, man, that clicked for me now. I see that. Share that, so that we can actually embrace that as well. Yes, indeed, Elder Zakin Yonah. And Torah Rabbah for all the words and the encouragement. Hallelujah. But with that, I'm going to close out with a Hatzi Kaddish. And then I'm going to open the microphone to Moreh Shebaniah and go forward from there. So with that, hallelujah. Yit Kadal Vayit Kadesh Shemei Rabbah. B'yamad Yivra Kiruteh V'yimelich Malkuteh B'chayechun V'yamichun V'chayed Kol Beit Yisrael B'agalav V'zman Kari V'miru. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mavorach Le'olam Ulmei Amaya. Yit Barak V'yistabach V'yit Pa'ar V'yit Roman V'yit Naseh V'yit Hadar V'yit Alei V'yit Halal Shemei Dekudesha Berechu Ve'ela Min Kol Barachata V'ashirata Tush Bechata V'nechmeta Damiran Ba'ama B'Shem Mashiach Yahushua Baruch Hashem Hallelujah V'miru. Amen.